On the 3rd of April, 1721, Robert Walpole was appointed First Lord of the Treasury and Chancellor of the Exchequer. It was not the first time he had held these offices, but from this point he is usually thought of as the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. Walpole's appointment and subsequent emergence as the new Premier Minister was closely connected to the fallout from the bursting of the South Sea bubble. This was a financial crash caused by the collapsing share price of the South Sea Company, which had attracted investors from all levels of society. Walpole was respected in the City of London and had promised a plan to help rebuild the economy. Other ministers had been implicated in the scandal, and Walpole won their support by helping to protect them. His support also extended to members of the royal family, gaining him the nickname of SKREENMASTER General. Nowadays, prime ministers are the leaders of political parties, selected by their membership, and have usually won a majority in the House of Commons at a general election. In the 18th century, the situation was much more fluid. There was no such party organisation, and it was much more important to secure and retain the support of the monarch. Walpole was not the first minister to wield commanding influence in Parliament. Under Queen Anne, there had been other great ministers, like Robert Harley, Earl of Oxford, and following the accession of George I, Walpole had effectively shared power with his brother-in-law, Viscount Townshend. Walpole's appointment as First Lord of the Treasury in spring 1721, though, is usually thought of as the beginning of something new. He chose to remain in the House of Commons, which by then had emerged as the dominant chamber with regard to financial matters, where Oxford and Stanhope had led from the Lords. Gradually, he came to control so great a command over appointment to other offices that he became in effect the most important minister in the administration. Walpole's position was strengthened by being able to rely on the support of George I. He was on much less comfortable relations with the Prince of Wales, and when George I died in 1727, many expected that Walpole would lose power. For a brief moment, it looked as if he would indeed be replaced as Prime Minister by the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Spencer Compton. But Walpole succeeded in outmanoeuvring his rivals and was able to remain in office. Soon after the accession of George II, Viscount Townshend decided to retire from politics, leaving Walpole the now undisputed Prime Minister. From around 1730 until 1742, Walpole led a successful administration, surviving further crises, such as that in 1733, when he tried to introduce a new excise. However, a central part of his programme had been to keep Britain out of expensive wars on the continent, and by the late 1730s, it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to do so. Walpole also faced an increasingly orchestrated opposition in Parliament, headed by the heir to the throne, Prince Frederick, and the powerful Scots magnate, the Duke of Argyll. In 1741, the country went to the polls again, in the first general election since 1734, and Walpole's supporters came under significant pressure. Although he retained a majority in the Commons, it was much reduced. Crucially too, Walpole lost control of a key committee that examined disputed election returns. This was taken as a sign that Walpole had lost control of the Commons, and steadily, members of the administration began to advise him to stand down. Early in 1742, after 21 years as Prime Minister, Walpole agreed to resign in return for a seat in the House of Lords. He was replaced by his old rival, Compton, who had also risen to the Lords, and was now known as Earl of Wilmington. Walpole spent his last remaining years in Parliament as a member of the Upper Chamber, as Earl of Orford, before his death in 1745. Following Walpole's fall from power, a number of rivals struggled to fill his shoes. His technical successor, Wilmington, was very much a figurehead, but following his death, after just a year in office, a new clear Prime Minister emerged in the form of Henry Pelham, who remained in post until his death in 1754. For the remainder of the 18th century, and well into the 19th, Prime Ministers after Walpole remained enormously dependent on the personal support of the monarch. In the days before the existence of the kinds of party structures familiar today, Prime Ministers were almost invariably the leaders of loose coalitions of multiple factions, and not uncommonly, just one of several senior politicians vying for supremacy. Walpole's long tenure of power undoubtedly changed things, but the evolution of the office of Prime Minister continued steadily for many years to come.